Today in the episode, Russian strikes hit U.S. investments in Ukraine. Sanctions and drones hit Russia's war machine. War spending leaves Russia's housing system in crisis. Russia is striking American businesses operating in Ukraine. During a drone attack on the city of Dnipro, Russian forces hit an oil extraction plant owned by the U.S. agribusiness group Bunge. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said this was not the first time the facility had been targeted, and noted that Russia has repeatedly attacked American companies in Ukraine. As examples, he cited last year's strikes on the Boeing office in Kyiv and the Flex manufacturing plant in Mukachevo. Russian attacks have also targeted Ukrainian port infrastructure linked to American business interests, damaging grain terminals in which Cargill, a U.S.-based company, held a stake and operational interests. One of the most significant cases occurred in June 2022, when Russian strikes destroyed a grain terminal in the port of Mykolaiv, disrupting exports and affecting global food supply chains. Russia is attacking the United States not only with weapons, but also with words. At the United Nations, Russia's ambassador Vasily Nebenzia said Moscow condemns what he called an act of armed aggression by the United States against Venezuela. He claimed U.S. actions signal a return to an era of lawlessness and domination by force. The statement reflects Russia's broader effort to use public accusations to attack Washington and divert attention from its own war against Ukraine.
There is no and can be no justification for the crimes cynically perpetrated by the United States on Caracas. We firmly condemn the U.S. acts of armed aggression against Venezuela in breach of all international legal norms in connection with the confirmed reports about the presence of the abducted president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his spouse in the United States. Today, as we are aware, they are in New York. We call upon the U.S. leadership to immediately release the legitimately elected president of an independent state and his spouse.
Ukrainian forces carried out a large-scale drone attack on oil and ammunition depots in several regions of Russia. Drones have reached as far as Bashkortostan, which is 2,500 kilometers away from Ukraine. So, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked a petrochemical plant in Sterlitamak in the Republic of Bashkortostan. It is one of the largest in Russia, which was hit in November 2025. Explosions associated with air defense operations were heard in the city. The plant produces aviation gasoline and synthetic polymers for the Russian armed forces. The fire also broke out at an oil depot in Lipetsk Oblast. It stores petroleum products that can be distributed to Russian military units. Leningrad Oblast governor reported debris falling at a compressor station. Local says they heard multiple explosions in Yaroslavl Oblast. They occurred where oil refineries and a fuel depot are located. Explosions were also reported in Pemza and Tver, with drones possibly targeting the Tver carriage works. For 3 days in a row, Moscow airports operated intermittently. They did not accept or dispatch flights. Here is screened from flight radar, and you can see no planes. For 3 days, hundreds of flights were delayed in Moscow due to a drone attack, and tens of flights were also canceled. I would like to remind you also that due to Putin's full-scale invasion, airports in Ukraine have been closed since 24th of February 2022. Meanwhile, Pentagon chief mocks Russia's air defense performance in Venezuela. Pete Hegseth questioned about Russian support of its allies during a U.S. special operation in the Venezuelan capital, Caracas, 3 days ago. Responding to Hegseth's remarks, First Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Sergei Kislitsa, emphasized that Venezuela had S-300 air defense systems supplied by Russia. It also has transferred an undisclosed number of Panzer air defense missile and gun systems, as well as BUK anti-aircraft missile systems.
And then we saw 3 nights ago, in downtown Caracas in Venezuela, as nearly 200 of our greatest Americans went downtown in Caracas. Seems those Russian air defenses didn't quite work so well, did they?
An Élysée Palace official has revealed that leaders of the Coalition of the Willing, at their meeting in Paris, committed support of Ukraine across 5 areas. Here they are: a ceasefire, continued support for the armed forces of Ukraine, the format for deploying multinational forces on Ukrainian territory, commitments on the actions of allies in the event of renewed Russian aggression against Ukraine, and long-term defense cooperation. But to be honest, the main issue about negotiations is to force Russia to turn to diplomacy instead of terrorism. The key is sanctions against Russian oil and gas complex to stop financing the war. What really makes sense for Putin? More in the next story for you.
The sanctioned tanker Christophe de Margerie is the only tanker in the Russian merchant fleet capable of sailing in the Arctic year-round, experts explain. This vessel is used by the aggressor country to deliver gas batches to the SAM storage facility in Murmansk Oblast in western Russia. From there, ordinary gas carriers deliver fuel to one of the few buyers of Russia's sanctioned LNG, China. It is the presence of the Christophe de Margerie that allows the Arctic LNG 2 plant to operate, though only at a quarter of its capacity.
Arctic LNG 2 was forced to significantly curtail production last winter due to the lack of shipping and brimming storage. Russia last month finished its first domestically built ice-class LNG tanker, Alexei Kosygin, which is heading toward the Arctic from the nation's Far East. This ship could also help unlock more exports from the same plant, from a publication by Bloomberg.
Increasing presence in the Arctic is a crucial task for the Kremlin. For Putin, this is not just a source of resources, but a key element of geopolitical strategy linked to future economic development and strengthening Moscow's positions on the global stage, analysts are convinced. Therefore, Russia has repeatedly tried to promote a number of economic initiatives during negotiations with the United States. Among them, a project for developing large natural gas fields in Arctic seas. However, Washington is now more inclined not to cooperation, but to intensifying sanctions pressure on the aggressor country. U.S. President Donald Trump threatened one of the largest importers of Russian oil, India, with new tariffs. Washington has already raised duties on most Indian goods to 50%. After that, in November 2025, the Indian energy giant Reliance Industries completely stopped purchasing Russian fuel from sanctioned Rosneft and Lukoil. However, it later began buying raw materials from other Russian suppliers. Trump is also dissatisfied with Putin himself, who refuses peace initiatives and continues the war against Ukraine.
I'm not thrilled with Putin. He's killing too many people. I thought that would be so. I settled 8 1/4 war. You know what the 1/4 was? Thailand and Cambodia. I did it again. They broke out, and I did it in about 5 hours, and I settled it. I'm giving myself 1/4, so I'm up to now 8 1/4. In other words, I settled the war, but then they broke out. They had a pretty bad breakout over the last 4 days. I got them to go back to peace, so I only give 1/4. I thought the easiest one would be, one of the easier ones would be Russia, Ukraine. It's not, and they both have done some pretty bad things.
The president of Ukraine is convinced that compromise from Russia is possible only under the condition of combining sanctions, active military support for Ukraine, and maintaining dialogue with participation from the USA and Europe. Volodymyr Zelensky reminded that the Russian Federation is ready to talk only when it feels real strength.
To talk not just on the phone, but talk with sanctions, talk with military support for Ukraine. Many processes are slowed down. On air defense, for example. The Russians know this perfectly well. They orient themselves. They see many things. Press. I want the USA to press harder. Although I will tell you honestly, their team worked a lot with our team throughout December. Really, very, very much. I am grateful to them for this. And I do not believe there is a real quick alternative to the dialogue that exists now.
Meanwhile, in the European Union, they are preparing to adopt the 20th sanctions package against Russia. It is expected to be agreed by the 4th anniversary of the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, writes Welt, citing sources. Particular attention is planned to be focused on all those involved in the abduction of Ukrainian children. According to diplomats, Brussels may introduce additional sanctions against the aggressor country's energy sector and banking sector. The possibility of banning imports of Russian uranium and imposing restrictions against Rosatom is also being considered. Reported by Yulia Hranovska, UATV News.
Russia continues paying exorbitantly high price for the war. For 7 months, the unmanned systems forces of Ukraine have engaged more than 168,000 Russian targets at an estimated cost of approximately $20 billion. Units carried out over 830,000 combat sorties. Among the destroyed targets were 500,000 tanks, approximately 2,500 artillery systems, over 7,500 vehicles, and almost 6,000 motorcycles. Drone operators also engaged over 50,000 Russian troops. Furthermore, the unmanned systems forces of Ukraine attacked more than 350 targets directly within Russia. Russia's war against Ukraine is draining state finances and leaving social needs unfunded. Russian lawmakers said money originally meant for civilian programs has been redirected to the war. A program to resettle people from unsafe housing has effectively stopped due to a lack of funds. The plan was designed to relocate nearly 350,000 people, with more than 160 billion rubles initially allocated for the next 3 years. It is worth noting what unsafe housing means in Russia. In many cases, these are buildings where walls and floors are collapsing, ceilings are falling in, structures are sinking, and residents live without running water, heating, sewage systems, and sometimes even without electricity. Putin demands a significant increase in tax collections for the budget. According to the Budget Law 2026, the Federal Treasury must collect an additional 3.2 trillion rubles in taxes this year, which is approximately $40 billion. The Russian Ministry of Finance expects to raise this money by increasing VAT to 22%. A radical tax reform for small businesses is expected to bring in an additional 200 billion rubles. Finally, a technological tax on equipment and electronics will be introduced on September 1st and is expected to get an additional 200 billion rubles over 3 years. That's all for today's News Digest. Stay informed, stay critical, like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.